All right, you guys, welcome to session 7. Today we are talking about poetry, and I'm really excited because I've always loved poetry. You know, growing up, my mom had a rhyme or a poem for almost everything, and I used to ask her, how do you know so many poems? And, you know, she told us that she had to memorize a poem a week growing up, and maybe some of you had to memorize poems as well, but poetry stays with you. Poetry is something that is really powerful, and there's a lot of research that shows how valuable it is to memorize poetry. But one kind of funny story, I have some books that were my mom's when she was little. This is one of them. There's 16 of them. This is number 16. In fact, you can probably see they're up on the shelf right there. And I noticed at one time that it was missing one of the volume number 5 is missing. And when I asked my mom about it, I said, which one is missing? Because each one has a different genre. And she told me that it's one that she kept because she still looks at it because it reminds her of her childhood, and it's the poetry volume. And as we looked through there, I recognized so many of the poems that my mom taught me growing up were poems that she actually read when she was little from this book. So poetry is powerful. As we go through today, I'm going to be sharing a lot of poetry with you, either me reading it or someone else reading it, because poetry is meant to be heard. It's not meant to just be read silently. So when you do poetry with your students, make them read it out loud. Poetry is as oral as it is verbal. So you need to hear it, you need to read it. If you have those little whisper phones that I know a lot of elementary teachers have, you know, that's a good way to have students read it so they can hear it out loud themselves. But poetry is meant to be heard. Maybe you have a favorite poet or a favorite poem. Every year during April, I buy myself a poetry book for my home library because April's National Poetry Month. And I wanted to show you the one I bought this year, so it's brand new because I just bought it this last month. This is called Leaves of Grass. And this is an ode to Walt Whitman, who, as you know, is an American poet. But the author here, B.A. Van Cise, he is a photographer. And he had this idea. He had surgery and was kind of out of work for a while, and during that time he discovered that he was a descendant of Walt Whitman, and he started researching a lot of Walt Whitman's books, and he was really inspired by Leaves of Grass, which is a book by Walt Whitman, and he decided he wanted to do a photography book centered around contemporary poets who were all kind of descendants of Walt Whitman. He kind of paved the way for American poetry. So this is called Children of Grass, kind of all descendants of these Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. But he went around and he originally was going to do just 12 contemporary poets, and it turned into be about 40. But he did photography and included one of their poems, and it is amazing. It is so beautiful. His photography is great. And he collaborated with the contemporary poet to pick the poem and then a photograph that would kind of help with the feel of that poem. And so this is a compilation, and I haven't read it front to back. I've kind of just flipped through it here and there, but it's just a beautiful book with some contemporary poets. And then in the back he goes through and tells more information about each one. So that's my newest addition to my home library collection, Children of Grass. And I want to show you one that I just bought as well for my classroom library, or my library at my school. And this is a new one by Lois Lowry, who you probably know her as author of Give Her the Stars and lots of great fiction books. But this one is actually poetry about World War II reflections. Specifically, some are memoirs of her own memories of World War II, but then also dealing with the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the Japanese relocation. So really beautiful poetry book set during the time of World War II. World War II reflections.